On a cold night in December 1995, police in North Wales discovered a man's body on a lonely beach, stabbed multiple times, and left to die in the dark. It was the fourth such brutal killing in just 3 months, and a wave of panic was gripping the region. A serial killer was stalking the night, choosing victims at random and attacking with horrific violence, as if enacting a real-life slasher film. When the murderer was finally caught, the truth was as shocking as the crimes. The killer turned out to be Peter Moore, a 49-year-old local cinema owner, known for his dry humor, love of old films, and trademark black attire. By day, Moore was a polite, soft-spoken film fanatic who ran a small chain of movie theaters and even dressed up as Darth Vader at charity events. But by night, he was transforming into a sadistic predator. In late 1995, Moore stalked and stabbed 4 men to death. At his trial, Moore bizarrely blamed the murders on an imaginary lover named Jason, a nod to the hockey-masked killer from the Friday the 13th horror movies. This disturbing case earned him the nickname the Man in Black, and it remains one of the most chilling chapters in Welsh criminal history. Peter Howard Moore was born in 1946 and grew up as an only child in North Wales. His mother, who had given birth to him in her 40s, doted on Peter and considered him a miracle baby. The two were extremely close, and Moore lived with her well into adulthood. Outwardly, he was unremarkable, a short, bespectacled fellow who owned and managed several small cinemas in North Wales. Neighbors knew Moore as a friendly businessman with a passion for cinema. He loved classic films and horror movies, and he often wore a black shirt and tie as something of a personal uniform. No one realized that his penchant for black clothing hinted at the darkness inside him. Unbeknownst to those around him, Peter Moore had been leading a secret life of violence for decades. Starting as early as the 1970s, Moore committed numerous assaults on men in the region, often targeting gay men he encountered under cover of night. He would later be linked to 39 sexual attacks against men over a 20-year span, attacks that went largely undetected or unsolved at the time. Moore kept these crimes hidden, cultivating a respectable image by day and venting his sadistic urges in the shadows. He even kept a police truncheon hanging by his bed, a weapon he used not for protection, but to beat and dominate his victims during these assaults. This long-running campaign of violence was a grim prelude to what was coming next. In 1994, Moore's beloved mother passed away. This event seemed to remove the last restraint on his dark impulses. No longer under his mother's watchful eye, the 49-year-old Moore spiraled completely out of control. The Man in Black was about to fully emerge. By his own later admission, Moore embarked on what he chillingly described as a campaign of pure hatred against strangers. Within months of his mother's death, Moore's fantasies of murder became a reality. Moore's series of murders took place in the autumn of 1995, over roughly 3 months. His victims were all men, but there was no single profile. They ranged in age from 28 to 56. What they had in common was simply the bad luck of crossing paths with Peter Moore at the wrong time. Each encounter started as an unassuming meeting and ended in a bloodbath. September 1995. The first murder. Moore's first known murder victim was 56-year-old Henry Roberts, a retired railway worker who lived alone in a rural cottage on the Isle of Anglesey. One night in early September, Moore broke into Roberts' home near the village of Caergiliog and attacked him. He stabbed the older man repeatedly with a knife, inflicting fatal wounds, and then fled into the darkness. Henry Roberts was found dead at the scene. There was no obvious motive, no robbery, no personal grudge, just a senselessly brutal killing. October 1995, a deadly encounter in the woods. The next month, Moore struck again. He visited a gay nightclub in Liverpool, across the border in England, where he met 28-year-old Edward Carthy. Moore was sociable and invited Carthy to come with him for an after-hours drive, perhaps suggesting further drinks or adventure. The young man agreed, unwittingly climbing into a van with a killer. Moore drove Carthy across to Wales and into the remote Clocanon forest. There, under the cover of trees, Moore turned on his passenger. He stabbed Edward Carthy to death in a frenzied attack and mutilated the body before leaving it hidden in the woods. It was a scene as gruesome as any horror movie, and it was entirely real. November 1995, ambush on a lonely road. In November, a third victim fell prey to Moore's knife. Keith Randalls, 49, was a traffic manager working an overnight shift as a security guard at a road construction site off the A5 highway in Anglesey. The road was quiet and dark when Moore approached. In an unprovoked attack, Moore stabbed Keith Randalls repeatedly and left him mortally wounded by the roadside. This victim in particular seemed completely random. A married man, simply doing his job, murdered for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Later, when investigators asked Moore why he had targeted this innocent stranger, his answer was as cold as it gets. He said he killed for fun. Even hardened police and prosecutors were taken aback by the casual cruelty of that statement. December 1995, murder on the beach. Moore's fourth and final known murder came just before Christmas. The victim was 40-year-old Anthony Davies, a crematorium worker from the town of Abergele. On a chilly night in late December, Moore crossed paths with Davies near Pensarn Beach on the North Wales coast. The details of their encounter are sparse, but it ended with Moore savagely stabbing Anthony Davies on the dark beach and leaving him to bleed to death on the cold sand. It was this murder, occurring in a public place, not far from a holiday seaside town, that truly galvanized the police investigation. By now, authorities realized they likely had a serial killer in their midst. 4 men had been slain in seemingly motiveless knife attacks, and North Wales was gripped with fear. Throughout the spree, Moore showed a shocking level of brutality. All 4 men were stabbed multiple times. Some were tortured and mutilated after death. The killer appeared to relish the violence. He chose isolated locations: a private home, a forest, a quiet road at night, a dark beach, ensuring that these heinous acts happened far from prying eyes. With no witnesses initially coming forward, Moore managed to slip away after each attack, returning to his normal life as if nothing had happened. In late 1995, as the body count climbed, North Wales police launched an intense manhunt for the unknown murderer. The public was warned to be cautious, especially at night. Investigators struggled at first. The killings appeared random, and the perpetrator left little forensic evidence at the scenes. No one suspected that the polite cinema owner could be behind such crime, which helped Moore fly under the radar. He was, in the words of one article, the last person anyone would suspect of such savagery. However, after the murder of Anthony Davies on Pensarn Beach, a key clue emerged. Witnesses reported seeing a van parked near the beach around the approximate time of the crime. This was the break the police needed. They traced that van, which was registered to none other than Peter Moore. Investigators likely felt a mix of confusion and alarm. Moore didn't fit the typical image of a raging serial killer, but the circumstantial evidence was mounting. Surveillance and background checks on Moore revealed his history as the owner of several local cinemas, and perhaps even whispers about his suspicious nighttime activities. On December 18th, 1995, police moved in and arrested Peter Moore on suspicion of the murders. A search of Moore's home quickly turned up damning evidence. Detectives found a collection of knives, including blades that could have been used in the stabbings. They also discovered blood-stained clothing and personal items belonging to the victim, macabre trophies that Moore had kept as souvenirs of his kill. Most chilling of all, officers uncovered Moore's own handwritten notes and journals meticulously documenting the crime. It was as if Peter Moore had been keeping a private log of his murder spree, reliving each act on paper. These trophies and records left little doubt that they had caught the right man. Confronted with this overwhelming evidence, Moore confessed to all 4 murders during police questioning. In a disturbingly matter-of-fact manner, he described how he chose his victims and how he killed them. Investigators noted that Moore showed no hint of remorse. In fact, his confession was so detailed and delivered with such eerie calm that it unnerved even the veteran officers in the room. Here was a man calmly recounting acts of extreme cruelty as if he were discussing the weather. Moore freely admitted that he killed for the fun of it, reaffirming the chilling motive that he had hinted at earlier. Yet, Peter Moore's cooperation would not last for long. Once he was charged, and the case headed toward trial, Moore began to change his story. This set the stage for one of the most bizarre courtroom defenses in UK serial killer history. Peter Moore's trial for the 4 murders took place in November 1996. By now, the press had dubbed him the Man in Black, a nickname coined by lead prosecutor Sir Alex Carlyle during the proceedings. Carlyle described Moore as the Man in Black, black thoughts, black clothes, black deeds, a phrase that highlighted the darkness of Moore's actions and the fact he often wore black attire. The name stuck, and reporters across Britain ran with the sinister moniker for this quiet cinema owner turned killer. Despite having confessed earlier, Moore pleaded not guilty to the murders in court. He now attempted to pin the blame on a fictional character. In a startling twist, Moore told the jury that the real killer was his lover, a man named Jason, who he claimed was responsible for the stabbings. According to Moore's story, Jason was a homosexual boyfriend who worked as a chef, and it was this person who had murdered the 4 men, while Moore himself was innocent. If that explanation sounded far-fetched, it was because Jason did not exist at all. Moore had fabricated an alter ego to try and escape punishment. The choice of name was no coincidence. Jason is famously the name of the masked killer in the Friday the 13th slasher film franchise. Moore, being a horror movie buff, deliberately invoked this cinematic villain. In essence, he was suggesting that his Jason was like a real-life Jason Voorhees, committing a string of murders in North Wales. The audacity of this defense was jaw-dropping. It was as if Moore was turning his trial into another part of his macabre movie fantasy. Investigators and prosecutors saw through Moore's ruse immediately. No evidence of any Jason was ever found. In fact, police thoroughly checked every hotel, restaurant, and business along the North Wales coast for an employee named Jason, fitting Moore's description, and turned up nothing at all. The supposed lover was a complete fabrication, and the jury knew it. Moore's own solicitor later acknowledged that the Jason alter ego defense was highly unusual and difficult to present with a straight face. It's clear Moore invented this false persona, either as an insanity ploy or simply to stoke drama, given his flair for the theatrical. The prosecution, meanwhile, presented a rock-solid case. Beyond the physical evidence tying Moore to the crimes, they highlighted Moore's obsession with horror films and how he seemed to reenact them. Prosecutor Alex Carlisle noted striking parallels between Moore's murders and scenes from certain slasher movies. In one dramatic moment in court, Carlisle produced a VHS video tape box for a horror film series that Moore had likely watched or shown at his cinemas. The scenarios depicted on the box closely mirrored the way Moore had carried out his own killings. The implication was clear. Peter Moore had taken inspiration from violent movies to script his real-life crimes. One of the Friday the 13th films had even been released not long before Moore began his spree, possibly sparking his deadly imagination. Moore certainly knew the franchise well, and his choice of the name Jason for his phantom accomplice practically advertised his inspiration. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a transparently false defense, the jury swiftly found Peter Moore guilty on all counts. In November 1996, he was convicted of the 4 murders. The trial judge, appalled by the senseless brutality of Moore's crimes, delivered the harshest possible sentence: life imprisonment with a whole life tariff, meaning Peter Moore would never be released. The judge made it clear that there were no mitigating factors in Moore's case. This was a man who killed innocent people purely for his own pleasure, a man deemed too dangerous ever to walk free. As he was led away to prison, Moore reportedly smirked and remained unnervingly calm. For him, the courtroom had been another stage. Observers noted that Moore even seemed to enjoy the notoriety and attention the trial gave him. The Man in Black had reveled in the spotlight, but now the show was over. It was time for the final fade to black on Peter Moore's reign of terror. Peter Moore, now in his late 70s, remains behind bars to this day. He is serving his sentence at HMP Wakefield, a maximum security prison known for housing Britain's most violent offenders. Moore is one of the very few UK inmates serving a true whole life sentence with no possibility of parole. In prison, he reportedly befriended another infamous serial killer, Dr. Harold Shipman, perhaps finding common ground in their dark notoriety. Shipman committed suicide in 2004, leaving Moore to continue his own long, empty incarceration. As of now, Moore will spend the rest of his life in a jail, which is exactly where he belongs. In 2011, Moore attempted a legal appeal, arguing that whole life sentences were a violation of his human rights, but his challenge was rejected. No court has shown any sympathy for the man who slaughtered 4 people for fun. Even decades later, Moore has never expressed genuine remorse for his crimes. He has occasionally made attention-seeking claims. At one point, he even boasted of a 5th murder that was never substantiated. Authorities firmly believe his tally of victims stands at 4, and Moore's hint at a 5th was just another sign of his manipulative, narcissistic personality. Within Wales, Peter Moore is remembered as one of the country's worst serial killers, sometimes called Wales's own Hannibal Lecter, or simply the man who brought horror to North Wales. Yet, interestingly, outside of true crime circles, Moore's name is not widely known in Britain, especially compared to killers like the Yorkshire Ripper or Fred and Rose West. There are a few reasons for this relative obscurity. Moore's killing spree was short, giving the media less time to build up a frenzy before he was caught. Moreover, 1995 to 1996 saw the sensational trial of the Wests, whose crimes were so depraved they dominated headlines and overshadowed Moore's case. Additionally, Moore's victims were adult men, ordinary individuals, and their tragic deaths sadly did not evoke the same public outrage in the UK as cases involving children or female victims often do. All of these factors allowed Peter Moore to fade somewhat into the shadows of British criminal history, a forgotten boogeyman outside of North Wales. Forgotten or not, the terrifying legacy of Peter Moore endures for those who know the story. In 2020, Moore's former solicitor, Dylan Rees-Jones, published a book about the case, The Man in Black, Peter Moore, Wales' worst serial killer, hoping to shed new light on his crimes. In the book and in interviews, those involved in the case reflect on Moore's character. They describe him as extraordinarily manipulative and self-indulgent, a man who took pleasure in the power of life and death, and even in the drama of the courtroom. Lord Carlisle, the prosecutor, said Moore caused more damage than anyone else I've ever prosecuted, which is remarkable considering Carlisle handled many serious cases. The horror movie angle also remains a point of discussion. Moore clearly drew inspiration from his favorite slasher films, but experts are quick to point out that movies alone don't create a killer. Peter Moore already had violence in his heart. The films may have shaped the style of his crime, but not the desire behind them. For the people of North Wales, the tale of Peter Moore is a permanent cautionary tale. It's a stark reminder that monsters can wear ordinary masks. Who would have thought the polite man running the local movie theater was secretly fantasizing about murder every night? Moore's neighbors had no warning. He gave off no obvious serial killer vibes. As one account noted, evil doesn't always announce itself with strange behavior. Sometimes it shakes your hand and blends into the background. The community that once felt safe discovered that darkness had been living among them all along, attending church bazaars and chatting about the latest films, even as it plotted unspeakable violence. The story of Peter Moore, the Man in Black, plays out like a terrifying film script, except that it was all too real. He was a man who turned fiction into reality, using the cloak of night to act out his twisted, Friday the 13th inspired fantasies. But unlike the seemingly unstoppable killers of the movies, Peter Moore was caught and stopped. He will spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell, permanently removed from society. The 4 men he murdered will never be forgotten by their loved ones, and the scar Moore left on the community will never fully heal. As disturbing as this case is, it serves to remind us of a crucial truth. Sometimes, the most ordinary person by day can be a monster by night. Reality can be more frightening than any film. And in the case of Peter Moore, the horror was homegrown. A real-life Jason who made the leap from watching Friday the 13th to reenacting it in the Welsh countryside. Fortunately, his reign of terror was short-lived, and this real-life boogeyman now haunts only the halls of a prison, never to harm the innocent again.